Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar on how to enhance your business processes using RPA with Ranorex Studio. My name is Ivan. I'm one of the solution engineers at Ranorex, and I'm joined by my colleague Aaron, who works in the same capacity. Before we start, a few housekeeping items. All attendees will be on mute throughout the call, but feel free to ask your questions in the GoToWebinar console. We will try to address them as we go and in the dedicated Q&A section at the end. This webinar is being recorded. The link will be shared by email afterwards, as well as posted on our website approximately within a week. We will also have a couple polls running in GoToWebinar, and we'd appreciate your participation. For the agenda, we will go through a brief introduction to the topic, discuss the benefits, show how Ranorex can handle an RPA scenario, and touch upon other use cases, then conclude with the Q&A. To set the context, organizations today face multiple challenges, including stringent compliance requirements, worker shortages combined with high turnover rates, high customer expectations, and more. In such an environment, organizations are turning to digital transformation to not only increase efficiency, but also increase customer satisfaction and reduce risk. Robotic Process Automation, or RPA, has been one of the fastest growing solutions. It transfers fairly simple, repetitive, rule-based tasks from human workers to digital ones, also called bots. In 2021, Ranorex and Pulse Research surveyed 246 technology leaders to learn which RPA initiatives had delivered the best ROI, and you can see the results on the right. Most common use cases included user provisioning, customer support, and back office data management. And the poll you'll see shortly on the screen will help us see how applicable those findings are to our closer audience, and would appreciate if you would share your answers. The poll will be open for just a couple minutes, and then we can proceed with the agenda. Okay, thank you for taking the time to go through the poll. And for this presentation, we'll focus on these four major benefits which are typically associated with RPA. First, bots operate 24/7, helping organizations manage workflow peaks and make the most efficient use of their resources. RPA can help improve productivity by allowing employees to focus on more value-added tasks. Next, bots reduce the chance of manual error and improve the overall quality of the process. RPA also allows to better align with the constantly shifting volume of work, especially in the challenging labor market. And lastly, RPA improves compliance as bots are consistently following the precisely defined process. And also, the tools provide a detailed audit trail with analytics. All of these result in fast and significant cost savings. Expanding RPA will be critical moving forward, especially when it comes to the diversity of supported processes and technologies. While Ranorex is not often mentioned in the RPA tool rankings, that is mostly a misconception. There is a significant overlap between automated testing and RPA capabilities. Therefore, tools that excel in the first area will often have strong performance in the second one. And for this webinar, I will be using the RPA terminology when showing Ranorex features. And one important thing to mention, no extra license is required to use Ranorex Studio for RPA. And now we'd be curious to know if you are already using another RPA tool, or you're considering it, or you have tried Ranorex for that purpose and want to know more about the features to it. So here's another quick poll to get your feedback. Great, thank you. So let's talk about how Ranorex can help you achieve those 4 benefits on a user provisioning example. And towards the end, we'll also discuss how Ranorex feeds into broader business process automation. The high-level steps are to record the scenario, aka the bot, or define it using keywords, launch the scalable execution, review the intuitive reports, and then efficiently maintain your assets. As I will be passing the presenter to my colleague Aaron, could you please describe the process we're going to automate in more detail?
Sure thing, Ivan. First of all, just to check, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So we're going to be simulating part of a new hire onboarding using the RPA Challenge web app. Our bot is going to need to download user data in an Excel format and then use it to submit forms while the field layout changes each time, and that's kind of the challenge in the RPA Challenge. So we can talk about speed, and we can talk about productivity, and how Ranorex Studio's easy to use test automation tools can be adapted for RPA. You can shorten the learning curve with capture and replay capabilities for codeless automation. Yet you can also get the full IDE and open API for Ranorex. So Ranorex has excellent object recognition, and that allows you to easily identify the UI elements of your application, regardless of the platform. And you can see how page elements are quickly captured. And we're going to be taking a look at that in just a second here. And so just one thing to touch on is for the setup, for the example that we're going to see, as long as the data file has a consistent path, assigning it to the bot once is sufficient to handle any number of future runs with new data. And probably the key difference compared to the automated testing configuration is that you don't add validation steps in this case.
Great. So I think at this point we can just start sharing your screen and walk the audience through how the demo was built, some of the recording aspects, and some of the adjustments you've made to make it more resilient.
Sure thing. And just feel free to ask me questions or to jump in as I'm walking through this demonstration. Maybe if you have any questions or anything for me, um, give me just 1 second and I'll get this set up to share here. Hold on just 1 second here. Just double check that I can make myself presenter. All right, I should be sharing my screen now. Would you just confirm that you can see my screen here?
Yes, we can. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we're going to be taking a look here at this solution for RPA challenge. And before we dig into that, I do want to just show what the website is that that we're going to be working with here. So let me take a look at RPA challenge. So RPA challenge is a fairly simply laid out website, but the real trick here, the real gotcha, is that you can see this form here, and every time we hit the submit button, the form is dynamic, and so therefore it changes. And so the challenge in RPA challenge is to be able to accurately fill out this form using the data that we download in this download Excel here in the Excel file, which it's a small Excel file. It has, I think, 10 rows in it. And so we're going to download that Excel file, and then for each row of data, there are this many columns, 1 column for each one of these inputs. And we're going to be filling them out, and that's all going to be done, of course, in an automated fashion through Ranorex. But so something important to note is that, of course, each one of these inputs, this challenge, not only did the inputs, their locations move on the page, but something else that's that we're going to take a look at here is that their IDs change as well. So not only do their positions change, but their IDs change as well. I'm going to, and the way that I know that, and the way that we'll be able to see that is I'm going to use the Ranorex Spy tool. I'm going to open up the Spy tool here, give that just a second. And I'm going to track. And what tracking does is, you see if I move my mouse around, I can track any of the elements that are in my application. And this tracking works the same way for web and desktop and mobile. Basically, we're doing a little discovery here to find out some information about these elements, what makes them unique and what makes them able to be automated. So let me just click on this input here. So what you'll see here is this tree-like structure here is the HTML structure of the page, right, of this RPA challenge page that we're working with. And when we dig down into this tree, we can see that this is the input. This is the input that I've clicked on. And something important to note is that this input has a name or ID. I guess the name and ID attributes are the same here. Yeah, name and then ID. And this ID or name, this attribute changes every time you submit the form. So that's one of the most difficult parts of doing this type of automation with any tool, is how do you handle not only a dynamic ID, but also a dynamic location of an element in an application. And Ranorex handles this very well because the way that we do it, the way that we find that element is to use what makes that element unique. So in this case, we have an element which is an input, but just a level up, we have its label, right? So for each one of these inputs, it's in its own div, and the div, of course, for the input has a unique ID, but then it has, or rather a dynamic ID, but what it has is a unique label. And this label, regardless of, if phone number is here, or if it's down here, Ranorex will find the label. We specify that we want to find the label, which has this unique text value. And so then, because we're searching for the text of the label and not its dynamic ID and not its location on the page, that's how we're able to find it. And I think we're going to see, let me just double check here. Downloads, good here. Okay. So I know I've been doing a bit of talking about this, and this is more of the theory of how this works. So let's take a look at actually seeing how this whole thing works. I won't go into detail yet about the structure of my test here, but I will just mention for those of you who are not familiar with Ranorex, what it is that we're looking at here before I run this. What we're seeing here is this is a test suite, and inside of our test suite, we have a test case. You can have as many test cases as you'd like inside of a test suite. And inside of our test case, we have a few recording modules. We know that they're recording modules because they have this little camera here. We also have the ability to write code modules, but this entire demo is code-free. Didn't have to write any code. If I were to write code, it would be in either C# or VB.NET. But in this case, we did not have to write any code to do this. So these recording modules are broken up in a way that is easy to read, and it's very modular. You can copy and paste these. If I wanted to have this download any one of these recording modules, if I were building out a more extensive test and I wanted to be able to just reuse them in different places, I can just drag and drop them, or I can copy and paste them wherever need be. But so the workflow here is that if we run this test, Ranorex is going to open the browser and navigate to the RPA challenge page. It's going to do that on a browser that I specify, in this case, the Chrome browser. But I could specify any number of browsers. I could just have one browser, or I could actually make my browser into a variable just by selecting as new variable. And then I could take what is right now not a cross-browser test, and with just a single action, I could make my entire test cross-browser compatible and iterate through and run this same test on as many browsers as I'd like if I give my solution a list of browsers that I want to work with. But so for now, we're just going to open up the website on Chrome. We're going to download the Excel file, which you saw here. You have to start by downloading the Excel file. And then in here, I have this add users, and we haven't talked about this yet. This is a smart folder. And what a smart folder allows me to do is to add a data source inside of a test case. So I can add a data source to my test case. I can add it in a couple of different locations, but here I'm adding it to my smart folder. So I know I mentioned that, so we download this data and it's 10 rows of an Excel file with 10 rows. And so I want to be able to reuse all of my actions in this add user recording module as many times as is necessary, right? If my data source had 10 rows or 5 rows or 1 row or 100 rows, it wouldn't matter because I'm going to bring in my data source and I use it here. And of course, Ranorex tells me just how many rows are in my data source. But this basically acts as a loop. I'm without the need to write code, I'm basically writing a loop here saying, okay, I have 10 rows and I want to run this recording module once for each row. And the data in my data set there, in that Excel file, I bind that to some variables that I created here. Once again, all code free, just hitting the drop down and creating a variable. And setting the values, I'm using this Ranorex smart action called set value to set values in this form, and then hit the submit button and cycle through all of the iterations that for the data that we have. So after doing all that, I just have a simple validation step when the test runs successfully, and you start the test and then you go through all 10 of these form submittals. Then you get to a success or failure screen that says, congratulations, your test succeeded, and here's how fast it ran. Here's the number of milliseconds, and of course that all appears here in the website. But the cool thing here is that in my validate success message, of course, I can validate that I'm getting the message that I want to get, right? So if the test fails, then I'm not going to get that message, and so my validation, I'm not going to get that value that I want to get. But the cool thing here is that I can grab that value from the website that I'm going to see my message, and I can put that in my report, the report that gets generated at the end of each test run. And so we can capture that data. How many milliseconds did it take? This is a good way to monitor the speed, and this is applicable to a number of different applications. The amount of time elapsed to run the test, we're also going to see that. The report has logging for each one of the actions. But let's see, and then finally the last step there is just the close browser step. But I know I've been talking for a while. Let me go ahead and let's actually run this and see how it works. So I'm gonna hit run here and take my hands off the keyboard and mouse. So we've got a 5-second delay. You can see in the bottom right after having downloaded that Excel file. And now look how the data starts to get populated. Finding these items. There we go. Found all of them. Same thing here. And finally there, and I know it went by really quickly at the very end there, we did see, and the page was closed, but we did see briefly a congratulations message. It said congratulations, and then underneath it said, your test ran in however long. And since I captured that data and put it into my report here, if I expand all my details in my report, we can actually see that. We'll see that at the very bottom. We can see the logging for each one of these steps. So give me a second here. Looks like the test ran, the solution ran in 35.75 seconds. And we can see here time elapsed basically from 0, 3 seconds, 11, 12. Going through all of the iterations here, we can get all the way down to the end, and we can see this message that I grabbed and wanted to paste into my report. Your success rate is 100%, all fields, 31,330 milliseconds. So that's good. I could use that however I want. If I just want to keep it in my report, that's fine, or I could choose to do something else with it. I could even do something like grab just the milliseconds out of, I could use in our get value action, I could use a regular expression and grab just the number of milliseconds, do something with that. I have a bit of flexibility there as far as what I want to do, especially if I'm taking the code-free approach. yeah, I have some ability to use that data however I'd like. But so this is hopefully a good example to see for you all. I think that the visual component of seeing the form get filled out, even though it's changing every time, and even though, I mean, one thing that you saw there is that because the fields are in different orders, it looks a little strange to see the form getting filled out from the bottom to the top, or from jumping all over the place to fill in all the inputs. But realistically, as long as the form gets filled out completely, that's all that really matters. So yeah, I think at this point, Ivan, either I can turn it back over to you, or if you'd like, we can take another little look as far as how to find those elements, how to find elements in an application like this. I know we saw a little bit about the dynamic IDs. We didn't touch too much on the actual creation of these variables and the data source, adding the data source here. But what do you think, Ivan? Would you like to talk? Just would you like me to just touch briefly on some of the how this data source is used, how it's used in a Ranorex test, how we do the data driving?
Maybe not the data driving yet, but we did get a question from the audience about how you let the SPY point to the label of an object instead of its ID. So I think that's a good segue into talking a little bit more about what Ranorex Path is, how it works, how SPY facilitates it. So if you could show us that aspect in a little bit more detail would be great.
Sure thing, sure thing. Let's see here. Got my SPY tool open again here. So getting back to where we were before, when I had clicked on this input for the SPY to give me the data about this input, let's take a look. If I move my SPY tool around, of course, if I move it around anywhere on the page, one of the ways to kind of understand how an application is built, and all applications are built a little differently, it looks like if I'm taking a look at this input here, I have the input, I have my label, and they're inside of this div. And so this is often the way that you will see an application be structured. And this is a really good setup to be able to detect these types of inputs. Now, sometimes when you are dealing with some applications, you are lucky enough that the developers of the application have given each one of these inputs, for example, a unique ID that is not dynamic, it never changes, and it's very descriptive, right? So in the case of, let's say, company name, maybe the developers gave this label the ID of company name, and then they gave this input the ID of, company name input, or something like that, something very descriptive. But since in this case we're dealing with the opposite level of difficulty, where we don't have any type of a descriptive name like that, the way that we find the label is, before I click on the label, I'm going to click on the label, but I already know that I have a parent div, and inside of that div I have this label and I have this input. So let me click on the label, and let's take a look at the structure of the page here. Right, so we can see that we have our label and our input. Both of them are inside of this div. And so what I need to do to find my input is, this is our Ranorex path here. So we have the DOM, which is the domain for this RPA challenge. And then here, my path is very robust. And for those of you who are not familiar with the path, what I mean by robust is that this path only has this one label that I'm looking for here, which is down here, all the way down at this level in the tree in the application, right? So we have our DOM, which is here. And then all the way down here, we have this label. Now, a path could be much more rigid and much less robust than this path. And that would imply that I have to, for each level of here, I would see those elements be in my path. Actually, let's see if we can see what that would look like. So I'll go into settings here, and I have my path set all the way to maximum robustness. But if I set it all the way to the other side to maximum speed, let me apply this. Let me see if we can change the path, force it to change. Yeah, okay. So this is what I'm talking about here. So take a look at how much this path has changed, right? So now Ranorex will find this element very quickly because it's traversing this, it's using this entire path, but the path is rigid. And what I mean by rigid is that you see we have these divs, we have indexes. Indexes are not often your friend, especially in an application that is dynamic or that changes dynamically. But we have all these divs and indexes all the way down to the level of, once again, the label that we saw before, right? But I want the opposite of that. I don't want such an explicit path that takes me directly to this object, because I know that that path is not going to work for each subsequent iteration of my test, right? It's only going to work the first time, and then it's going to break the second time because the form has changed. So let me set it back to all the way to robustness. Refresh here, and we're back to where we were before. So we have this wild card. Instead of having all of that path written out, we have this wild card, which basically just says, okay, in my application, in my DOM, at any level, find me a label that has the inner text of, in this case, company name. So anywhere in the application, I don't need to specify, in this div number 2, in tag, div index number 2, all the way down like that. I'm just looking for a label that contains an inner text value of company name. And I can use that because I know for a fact that there aren't, let's say, 2 labels that are identical, 2 labels in the application that contain the same inner text. If there were, then I could conceivably find that label in a different way, if I wanted to use an index there or something. But okay, I know I'm just kind of filling in some of the theory and how this works. But the main idea is, okay, if I can find a label with a name, a unique name, a unique text value, and I know that that input is at the same level, all I have to do is I have to take this label, I have to go up a level in my path here to the parent div here. So go up a level from the label and then dig back in to the div. Oops, I closed it. Dig back in to the div to find an input that, and it doesn't matter what the input ID is, what its unique values are. None of that stuff is important because I'm just looking for an input, because I know that there's only one input inside of my div. Let me get back here for a second. So I go up a level to my div, and then I dig into my div and just find an input. So let me do that. We're just going to change the path a little bit here. So let me go, that takes me up a level and then down into the div, and let me find an input and press enter there. So you'll notice that for the input, I'm not specifying what it's, unlike the label here where I'm specifying an attribute. I want to find an attribute with the inner text of company name or some specific attribute that I can specify from here. In this case, I'm just looking for an input. That's it. I don't need to specify an attribute. And in doing this, this is how I found the input, right? So, and we can see that red bounding box that's underneath that's underneath the Ranorex right now, which is why we still see it, because it's detecting the elements in the application we have. But you'll see there's the main div and there's the input inside of the div. So in this way, and when we're looking at the tree here, we're not even seeing that label that I was looking for in the first place. So that's basically it. We've found an element based off of its label value, and we know that that element, that input, is in the same div as the label that we've found. And so we're just going to search inside of that div for any input, because we know that there's only one input, and we know that in the case of this application, we know that there's only one input, and so we just need to find the input without specifying its ID, without specifying its class or anything like that. And so this workflow here is how I was able to find all of these elements. Let me expand this. These are all the elements that that I found in the application. Actually, notice I had specified an attribute for my inputs here, which this is a little bit redundant. This is not really necessary because you can see that we're taking a look at this same role and company, and then just search for an input. But I specified also at tag name input. So that's if it's an input, it's an input. I guess that's just me being overly cautious. That's not necessary because you can see here in the SPY tool that I was able to find the input without specifying an attribute. So basically I could go in and change all of my paths here to not have that attribute, and the test would work just the same. So that's an overview of how you would do this type of thing when you're searching for these difficult to find elements or these dynamic elements. And I've seen this type of, I've used this type of path manipulation, excuse me, for a lot of different applications, especially some of the web-based applications that are really dynamic, like large enterprise applications. Salesforce is one that comes to mind, but there are other ones that just are very complex applications where you're going to see an element tree that's not not just maybe 10 items deep. It's going to be 50 items deep, and even so, you'll be able to find those elements that you're looking for. And an application like Salesforce can get a little complex because things are so nested. But if, let's say, you're searching for a checkbox or an input, the workflow is the same as it is here. You're going to find the label for that checkbox or that input wherever it may be on the page. And because that structure tends to be so common, where you have a parent div or a parent element that contains a label and an input, or a label and a checkbox, or a label and a dropdown, or whatever it may be, you'll be able to find it every time. So that's how that workflow is applicable across a number of different kinds of applications.
Great, thank you for that. And
thanks, Ivan. Yeah, I know I've been going on and on. Do we have any more questions?
We do have one, but before we get to that, maybe you could talk a little bit about the maintenance. So let's say you did this initial setup of a bot. Let's imagine we have multiple bots pointing to the same page, doing slightly different things, and suddenly, let's say, an input changes or a field label changes. How would Ranorex repository come into play for the maintenance benefit?
Oh yeah, good question. So maintenance in this case is, let's talk a little bit first about what we're looking at here in Ranorex Studio. So this is a recording module and its actions. So this is the action panel of a recording module. And down here, this is our repository. This is the repository of elements that we're working with. And even though we can see here that I have multiple recording modules, whenever I click into any of them, I'm just using this one same repository for all of my different recording modules. Now I can choose not to. That's kind of a separate topic, but I can have as many repositories as I'd like in Ranorex. But in this case, then that's more applicable if you're working with multiple applications in the same test suite. Then that's a way to keep your elements kind of compartmentalized and everything nice and clean and tidy, which is something that we advocate for. It's a best practice in Ranorex, is to keep your repository nice and tidy. To keep your names fairly descriptive for your elements, all that. But so if I need to do some maintenance, let's say, for example, that in this something changes, right? Email has been changed to now email address, or there's been a change, and I need to accommodate that change.
Maybe we can use one change suggested also by the chat, which is a multi-language page. So let's assume we have the same field being called in English and let's say Spanish or anything like that.
Oh,
If
that's a
that
good.
feeds into you.
Yeah, that's a good topic that kind of throws in some additional complexity. Okay, so I guess there are a couple of ways to handle that, the multi-language, and it depends on how. It depends on if you have the data. So let me show what I mean. I'm going to actually open up the data set that we have here that we downloaded. So, right, these are all the rows and columns. These are all the values that we have for filling out this form. Now, I would say the most simple and straightforward way to handle multi-language support would be knowing in your data source what your language was going to be. So let's say we had a column here that was language, right? And then let's say we only had two languages to choose from, English and Spanish, right? So let's say we filled all these out, EN and ES. And we needed to fill out the form based off of, okay, the form's going to change if it's in English or if it's in Spanish, right? So all of a sudden, all these labels are going to be localized to one language or another. The way that we could handle that is by adding a condition in our smart folder here. So when I say condition, what I mean here, actually, let me just finish doing this, and then yes. Okay, so we've got EN and ES, this mix, right? And so let me close that. When I modified that data just now, I got a little prompt by Ranorex that said, hey, your data source has changed. Do you want to reload your data source? And in this case, I said yes. So let me take a look at my data source here. So now we can see the extra column that I just created, which Ranorex has brought in. And so I have my extra column, and this is going to be the column that I use, the values that I use to switch on which of these recording modules I'm going to use. So in the case of multi-language support, we could do this in a couple different ways, and I'm thinking through it now. So we could do it this way, where we have new recording module. let's say the Spanish one, so that we already have the English one and we have the Spanish one, right? Añadir usuario, add user in Spanish. And we could add a condition inside of our smart folder to where, let's see here, no, add a smart folder inside of our smart folder. I don't want this to get too complex, but in just talking through and thinking through this is a good challenge. So let's say we have our data source and we have it at the main smart folder level here. And in our data source, we have the column with the language. So we could add these smart folders inside of our smart folder, and we could add an if condition, add rule, and we'll choose our data source. That's our data source. Select a column, in this case language, it's my language column, is equal to, and this pre-populates, which is cool because those are the values that I have access to. So I can add this condition. Let's say, here's my if condition. If language is equal to English, then run, and actually I did this backwards. Take that out of there. Let me just disregard this one, the Spanish one for first. Let's just focus on this one. If, so we can see we have this if here, this if condition on our smart folder for add user. And because we want to be descriptive, we want to go back and we want to keep this clear. So English, ENG, if I can spell, English add user, and then we could do the same thing for Spanish. And put that in there. Just drag it and drop it. Spanish add user, same thing. Have a condition. If our language column value is equal to yes, then run this test. So in thinking through this, this is one way that we could do this. So we would, this module is currently empty, but we could basically just copy over all of our actions from here and just create new repository items that had the different text value, because of course it would be the Spanish, right? So nombre, apellido, email, dirección, all that. Or to simplify everything, what we could do is we could have we could have two intertext properties here. We could have an or. We could search for intertext first name or nombre, and basically just keep all of these elements the same. So those are two ways in thinking through this, how you could have this set up, and it really just depends on your use case and how the structure of the page and everything changes from one language to another. I know I've been kind of talking for a little while on this, but it's a good question. It's a good challenge. How would you handle something like that?
It sounds like that addressed the initial question.
Okay.
And let's go back to probably the last one for now, which was, can we do an unattended RPA bot? And just as an intro to that, in terms of the type of process, the one Aaron showed so far is kind of an unattended bot because it doesn't require any user input at all. As soon as you click run, it's completely hands off. So process-wise, yes. In terms of the setup, Aaron, if you could maybe touch upon, maybe without completely showing, but different execution capabilities, remote execution and the like, and then also the reporting. What can be maybe a little bit more custom, and how the report can be consumed by, let's say, a manager who is maybe not as technical to go directly into the studio.
Yeah, sure thing. So of course, what Ivan was saying was that I had to press the run button in this case to run the test, and but then, of course, from that point on, I was hands off. Now, if I wanted to remove even myself from having to press the run button and make this something, let's say, that was scheduled, or an RPA, excuse me, an RPA process that I wanted to have run on a set schedule or at a set time interval. In cases like that, you could use a test management tool to kick off your test run whenever you desire, to have your schedule set up. So then, therefore, you are not physically pressing a run button. You have a lot of options there as far as what you would use to do that kickoff or the scheduling of the tests, the test management side. We have one of our parent brands, our parent company's brands, TestRail, that we have a native integration with, that we could do. We could do that. We have our TestRail integration here, so you could integrate with TestRail, and you could have TestRail kick off your RPA, your bots that you're creating with Ranorex Studio. So you have that ability, and you also have the ability to, like Ivan was saying, you can run tests remotely. You can use the Ranorex agent. You can have, you can run these. And I know I keep saying tests. I'm just used to saying tests, but you can run these RPA bots, these solutions on remote machines anywhere you'd like. You can delegate all that through the Ranorex agent that we have here. So you can do that. Let's see what else. And as far as the reporting goes, you have the reports here that like we took a look at here. We've got our reports folder, all of my reports that I've created in here. And of course, I don't create them. They get created at the end of each test run. And these reports, like Ivan was saying, these could be shared with a manager. You can also, we do have a JUnit compatible reporting format that you could then push that to a tool, an external tool that you'd like to use to capture your reports there. Also for the debugging side of things, we have a native integration with Jira, so you can have your reports be pushed to your Jira account. And you'll basically see the same type of report that you'll see here with all of the logging information, with screenshots. In this case, the screenshots, you'll see screenshots when the test fails. But if I wanted to include screenshots, even in a test that I knew was going to be successful, I can add screenshots along the way. I can add screenshots as much as I'd like. Now, Ranorex does, when you're recording tests with Ranorex, you get screenshots taken along the way. You can either select to have the screenshots taken or not, but you can also manually create screenshots. So if I, let's see here, that button to download Excel, this is the one. So if I want to take a screenshot each step of the way, create screenshot, and I want to get a screenshot of my mouse click. Oh, I did not mean to do a snapshot, a screenshot, two different things. But yeah, so I can add these actions here to get screenshots along the way, and so I can capture all that. So it makes for a much more visual report. And I could even go so far as to eliminate all of the logging that we see in the report, and instead of seeing any of this logging, just see screenshots, right? So we could see screenshots for each iteration of this add user when we walked through and filled out the form. Instead of all this, I could just see screenshots of everything. So that has its benefits as well, because then if the test is successful, that's great. We see all the screenshots taken appropriately. If the test fails, we have a screenshot of where exactly it failed. We would get those screenshots anyway with a test failure, but we have all the additional screenshots as well from the entire run of the test up to a failure if it occurs.
So depending on the compliance requirements of a client, they could adjust the login level, the type of artifacts they could, the Ranorex could provide to them, correct?
Yes, they could customize all that. There's a lot of customizability in the reporting. Some of it is with the code-free approach. Some of it is where you go in and you change the code that gets generated. You don't really need to write any code. When you create these actions and everything with Ranorex, Ranorex is creating the code for you. And so if you needed to go in there and modify, like you said, the logging level or anything like that, you can do that either code-free or with a code-based approach.
Perfect, thank you. If you could now pass the presenter back to me, and we can do a couple of closing statements.
That sounds good. So you should have it now. I believe my screen should no longer be shared.
Yep, and you should be able to see us back into the presentation. So hopefully by now the audience has an idea about what RPA is, what it can do for you and for your business. It can increase teams' capacity by allowing them to complete more tasks in less time, freeing the staff for more creative and productive work. And then intelligent process automation tools do not really require expensive hardware or software. In addition, they do not require a lot of maintenance or support, as we hopefully demonstrated to you. With its easy-to-use interface and wide range of features, Ranorex Studio makes it fairly simple to automate your processes and, at the end of the day, improve your bottom line. If you could share your overall impression via the poll that will come up shortly, that will be great. And also, please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any additional questions or for implementation assistance, especially to one of Aaron's last point when it comes to more complexity via the coded modules or additional libraries, etc. Thanks a lot for your attention.